Episode 1: The Confession That Wasn't Meant for Earth. The priest died 2 minutes after hearing it. His lips were still wet with wine. His fingers still clutched the cloth of the confessional curtain. But his earth's faith had already shattered. Because what he heard that night wasn't the sin of a man. It wasn't lust. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't even blasphemy. It was a confession from something that should never need to confess. The voice that spoke to him came not from the other side of the curtain, but from above it. A voice made of wind and morning, a voice that echoed in the bones. I killed the prophet. The priest frowned. He thought it was a trick, a madman's whisper, until the air grew heavy, the candles flickered it out of fear, but respect, and the crucifix on the wall behind him began to tilt. Not toward the earth, toward the voice. The angel didn't name the prophet. He didn't have to. The name was sacred, erased from all scripture, not forgotten, forbidden. The priest tried to ask why, but his mouth would not move, because the truth was already inside him, uninvited. And then the angel said something no man was ever meant to hear. He asked a question heaven could not answer. So they sent me, not to protect him, but to end him. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy, ancient. And when the priest finally stumbled from the booth, pale and shaking, he collapsed on the chapel floor. His last words, whispered through trembling teeth, "Angels don't always descend in light. I mourn." The Vatican had sealed the confession booth, and the page of scripture above the altar had turned to ash, not from fire, but from remorse. Episode 2: The Wings That Trembled at Midnight. The priest who heard the confession died the same night, not from illness, not from violence, but from something that can only be called divine suffocation. His mouth was open, his eyes wide, and in his final moments, he had carved one phrase into the wooden floor with his own thumbnail. His wings were shaking. No one understood what it meant until the records surfaced, locked in the Vatican's forbidden archives, bound in cloth soaked with myrrh and ash, was a lost manuscript, unlabeled, undated, unread until now. It didn't begin with "in the beginning." It began with a crime, a celestial one. It described a prophet unnamed, unseen to carry a final message before the end of a forgotten age. And beside him, an angel was assigned. But the angel did not guard. The angel wept, and when the prophet asked why, the angel replied, "Because I've already seen your tomb, and I know who built it." From that moment on, the prophet began to change. His visions darkened, his voice cracked when he spoke of hope, and in his final sermon, he screamed it in wrath, but in terror, "He who guides me will make me." That sermon was never recorded. Only one listener remained in the church when it ended. A blind girl who saw what no one else could. She said his body collapsed, but his shadow remained upright, and it had wings. Wings that trembled, wings that bled, wings that did not rise in glory but shivered with guilt. They say that night, the wind over the city stopped, because even the air was afraid to carry what had been spoken. And from that day forward, every angelic painting in the church began to flake. But only the wings, not the faces, not the halos, only the wings, as if heaven itself could no longer bear to show what held it up. Episode 3: The prophet's bones were buried deep for God to hear. There was no grave marker, no name etched in stone, only a circle of scorched earth in the center of an abandoned monastery where nothing grows and nothing decays. That's where the prophet's bones were buried, not by men, not by angels, but by something in between. The soil there is warm, even in winter. Priests who have stepped onto it describe the same sensation, like being watched from beneath. Years later, a Vatican-appointed exorcist named Father Darius was sent to investigate the rumors. He didn't believe in angels that sin, or prophets that died by heaven's hand, until they unearthed a piece of rib-blackened, humming, wrapped in faded linen soaked with oil, and on that cloth, a single phrase was stitched in gold thread, not Latin, not Hebrew, but something older. He listened closely. That night, Father Darius awoke with dirt in his mouth. He hadn't left his bed, but his feet were muddy, and the prophet's rib was gone. He searched the grounds by torchlight, and there kneeling at the edge of the scorched circle was a figure with no face, just wings, torn, folded, dripping with something thicker than blood. The figure turned its head fully, but enough, and in a voice that cracked like glass, it said, He asked the question we are forbidden to answer. Darius fell to his knees, not in worship, in recognition, because in that moment, he remembered something buried from childhood, a dream he once had of a prophet with no mouth, only eyes, burning eyes that watched an angel choke on its own halo. And behind that image, a whisper he had long forgotten. Some messages are delivered by murder. The faceless angel dropped something at his feet, a page, flesh-colored and still warm, written on it, in ink that refused to dry. You buried him where even God's voice cannot echo. Then the wings folded in on themselves, and the figure collapsed into nothing but feathers. They say Father Darius never returned to Rome. He built a chapel instead, with no altar, no pews, only a floor of dirt, and a sign that reads, "Speak softly here, the dead are still listening." Episode 4: The Angel Who Asked for Forgiveness and Was Denied. There are prayers that rise, and there are prayers that return unanswered. This one came back burning. It wasn't made by man. It wasn't spoken in a chapel. It wasn't whispered through trembling lips. It was screamed by an angel. Samuel. The name wasn't written in any living gospel, but its echo was stitched between verses. He was not fallen, not chained, but damaged. The records hope little the Vatican preserved it, referred to it only once. The angel who begged to repent before his sin was complete. They say Samuel stood before the throne of heaven, wings frayed, eyes hollow, hands trembling with blood not his own, and he knelt. Angels don't kneel, not like that, but Samuel did. He wept, though angels are not built to feel sorrow in the way flesh does. He wept anyway. I was made to guide him, he said, but I heard what he wasn't meant to hear, and I loved him for it. Silence. Heaven did not answer. The seraphim turned their faces. The cherubim shielded their halos, and the throne they pulsed once with light, and then dimmed. Then came the voice, not the Creator's, but something older. You are forgiven for hearing, but not for hesitating. Samuel screamed, because that hesitation moment he stayed his hand was what allowed the prophet to see the truth, a truth too dangerous for even God to repeat. That night, Samuel descended back to earth not with glory, but with guilt. He appeared in a vision to a mute girl in Damascus. She wrote his words in ash on the wall of a well. I was told to protect his path, but I watched him walk into a question I couldn't answer, so I silenced the question. The prophet died without finishing his message, and Samuel was never seen again in heaven. But they say every time someone dares to speak honestly with God, not with worship, but with rage, a single white feather falls somewhere in the world and burns before it lands. Episode 5: The question that heaven never allowed to be asked. The prophet never shouted it. He didn't write it in scripture. He didn't whisper it to the crowds. He thought it, and that was enough. That was the sin. The question came not from pride, nor from rebellion. It rose slowly, painfully, like a splinter pushing out from the soul. He was alone in a desert cave. No fire, no scroll, just sand, silence, and a God who hadn't spoken in days. He looked up into nothing and thought, if God can't change his mind, is he still free? The moment he thought it, the wind died. Birds in the cliffs above dropped mid-flight. The rocks beneath him split not from heat, but from listening. And somewhere high above, Samuel flinched. He heard it, because angels are not sent to guide prophets. They are sent to guard God from what prophets might become. The moment the question formed, Samuel descended too fast, too furious, too late. He found the prophet kneeling, not praying, waiting for an answer heaven could not give. Samuel cried out, wings slicing the wind. The prophet looked at him not with fear, but with sorrow. You knew, the prophet whispered, even before I asked it. And Samuel, breathing like a thing that had never been taught how to break, responded, it's not the question that damns you. It's that you waited for an answer. The prophet closed his eyes, and Samuel did what he had sworn never to do. He touched him, gently, and silenced the question. They buried his voice in stone, his thoughts in dust, his name in a language now extinct. But the question lingers. Sometimes, it enters your mind when you're praying, uninvited, soft, innocent, and devastating. If God can change his mind, was I ever meant to be saved? Don't ask it out loud. Don't even think it fully, because somewhere still walking the ruined places of earth, is an angel with trembling wings, and he's listening. Episode 6, the choir that refused to sing his name. He was once counted among them, the prophet's name unspoken in heaven with the same reverence as Elijah, Enoch, and John was part of the sacred chorus, sung behind time. Until it wasn't, the first sign came quietly, a cathedral in Florence. Midnight Mass. The choir began a hymn older than memory, one that names the saints, the martyrs, the chosen, but when they reached his name, every voice went silent, not in mistake. In dread, mouths moved, but no sound came, and the organ untouched let out a single, dissonant note, like heaven itself had choked. The choir director collapsed moments later. No wounds, no illness, only this phrase whispered from her cracked lips. Heaven erased a name, but forgot the echo. Back in the desert, centuries before, Samuel had already known this would happen. That's why he begged from her sign it for himself, but for the memory of the man he had silenced. Because prophets don't just die, they echo, in hymns, in dreams, in the throat of every broken prayer. But this prophet, he had asked the wrong thing, he had waited too long, he had been heard, so the choirs of heaven were commanded, do not sing him, do not remember, let the silence wash him away. But silence, like ink, bleeds, and one night, a child in a monastery had since birth began to hum, not a lullaby, not a melody, but a name. The monks frowned, they recognized it, the name Heaven Band. That same night, all the stained glass windows depicting angels cracked in every chapel where his name had once been sung, and in one, a single feather fell from the depiction of Gabriel, but it was black and still warm. Later, a nun recorded the child's exact words before he fell into a dreamless sleep. He asked the question, and they buried the answer in a throat that will never sing again. Now, the choirs are fading, notes are missing from sacred psalms, because heaven can't silence a name, but it cannot stop a song that remembers. Episode 7, the church that refused to burn because he was still inside. They tried to erase him, first from memory, then from melody, and finally from stone. It was the last church that bore his image, a crumbling chapel in a forgotten village, where his likeness had been carved into the altar, hands lifted, not in blessing, but in grief. The Vatican ordered it destroyed, not quietly, publicly, to show that even heaven has a broom for heresy. The priests brought fire. Books of rites, never meant for public ears, but as the first torch touched the chapel's frame, the flames died. Not fizzled, not resisted, they died. The air turned heavy, the crucifix above the door creaking it downward, but sideways, like it was trying to listen. The lead priest ordered another attempt. This time, with salt and sulfur, they poured it across the floor, muttering prayers they didn't understand. Prayers meant for casting out angels that preserving them. And, done. The altar wept. A thick, reddish liquid seeped from the carving's eyes. Not blood, not water, something older. They called for backup. They brought bishops, relics, even bone fragments of saints. But still no flame would hold, until one acolyte, trembling, whispered, "He's still in there." They left, until the church breathed. All at once, the air was sucked inward like the stone itself had lungs. And with it came a sound, not a scream, not a voice, a heartbeat, slow, rhythmic, alive. It echoed through the walls, through their bones, through the very liturgy written in gold and denial, and carved above the altar. New words had appeared etched by no hand, not even angelic. You cannot burn what heaven never had the courage to hold. The Vatican sealed the church by mourning. No announcement, no explanation, only this warning carved into the door. If you enter, do not pray. He is still listening and still waiting for his answer. Episode 8, the prayer that reached a God who didn't want to listen. Not all prayers are welcome. Some arrive like broken glass in a holy cup, and some God turns his face from. But one reached him. It was not spoken by a saint, not whispered by a martyr. It came from a man who didn't believe anymore. His name was Elias Marek, a historian, atheist, called in by the Vatican to catalog a myth and dismiss it with academic flair. He was given access to sealed pages, forbidden scrolls and written on skin instead of parchment. and in the center of his research, always, the prophet, the one whose name had been sung, then silenced, the one heaven refused to remember. The more Elias read, the more the pattern formed. An angel, trembling, a prophet, undone, and a question that still echoed like thunder behind shut heavens. He couldn't stop thinking about it. If God can't change his mind, is he still free? That night, in frustration at faith, Elias looked up at the stars and said, "I don't believe in you, but if you're real, explain yourself." No answer came, not in that moment, but 37 seconds later. Every watch in the monastery stopped. Every candle's flame bent sideways, and Elias dropped to his knees, not from awe, from pressure. His ears bled, his eyes filled with like too much light, not warmth, but truth. And in his mind, something answered, not a voice, a presence, heavy, reluctant, ancient beyond forgiveness. Do not ask what I buried, do not summon what I once regretted creating. You were not supposed to find the echo. But Elias wasn't afraid. He was angry. You made him speak. He whispered. Then you made him die for it. The pressure faded. Silence returned. But on the floor beside him lay a torn page. Not from any book. It was warm, breathing, and written on it just 3 words. In divine script. I did listen. Elias held it with shaking hands and realized something horrifying. God had heard the question. He just never wanted anyone else to know the answer. Episode 9, The Throne That Trembled When the Prophet Spoke. There is no storm in heaven, no wind, no shaking, no fear, except once. It happened the moment the prophet's, voice is small, cracked, mortal reached the edge of eternity and asked. He didn't scream, he didn't demand, he simply spoke. Can even the throne be questioned? And in that instant, something happened that had not occurred since the fall of Lucifer. The throne of God trembled, not from wrath, not from rebellion, from recognition, because the question did not come from pride or defiance. It came from something worse, curiosity, the kind of curiosity that angels are forbidden to feel, the kind of thought that makes eternity blink. Samuel felt it before anyone else. He was watching, listening, and in that moment, as the prophet's voice crossed realms no human sound should touch, Samuel saw something that broke his understanding. The light behind the throne flickered, heaven dimly for a breath. But angels do not forget moments like that. The cherubim stopped their chant. The seraphim lowered their heads. And in the center of it all, the voice that shaped galaxies did not respond, because what could it say? The prophet had not accused. He had not doubted. He had simply asked the one question heaven had never prepared to answer. And in that stillness, Samuel understood. The throne isn't afraid of evil. It's afraid of the ones it gives truth to too early. So Samuel descended, not to deliver a blessing, not to offer guidance, but to silence what the light could not bear to answer. He found the prophet in prayer, eyes closed, tears not of despair but of clarity. Samuel wept too, but only once. Then he did what he was never created to do. He killed him, and as the prophet's final breath left his body, the wind in heaven returned, but it never sang the same again. Episode 10, The Day the light refused to shine on a prophet's grave. They buried him without ceremony. No hymns, no procession, only one pair of wings, folded in shame. Samuel stood alone beneath a sky that would not break, not with rain, not with thunder, not even with light, because heaven, for the first time since it declared, "Let there be," refused to look. The grave was shallow, not from neglect, but from fear that digging deeper would wake something that should remain silent. And for 7 days, the sun never touched the soil, not a shadow, not a gleam, only a lingering dusk that clung to the ground, like a veil of divine discomfort. Locals called it cursed. Birds flew wide circles around it, and those who tried to pray nearby found their voices caught in their throats, like someone else was already speaking where their soul should be. But the strangest sign came on the 8th day. A priest wandered past the grave before dawn. He carried a lantern, but when he approached, the flame dimmed instead of brightening, and on the tombstone carved by no hand saw new words appearing slow, glowing strokes. If heaven cannot shine here, then perhaps it is heaven that must change. He dropped the lantern. It shattered, but instead of fire, it released a feather, a single white feather, blackened at the tip, still warm, still trembling. Back in Rome, records showed that the same morning, every stained glass window depicting the light of God went briefly dark for exactly 1 minute and 7 seconds. No explanation, no damage, only darkness, and then silence. And somewhere beneath that skyless grave, the prophet smiled, because even if he was gone from memory, even if choirs refused to sing him, the light that once condemned his question now had to answer it. Episode 11: The question that angels were forbidden to ask each other. There are no secrets between angels, only silences. But there was one question on a terrible, blasphemous thought that even the highest choirs dared not ask, not out loud, not even within the folds of their minds. Because if one angel asked it, and another answered, heaven might fall inward. And yet, in the aftermath of the prophet's death, the silence cracked. It began between two angels, Raphael and Cassariel. They stood on the edge of creation, where stars are born and judgment sleeps. For eons, they had spoken only of light, of will, of obedience. But then came the question. Raphael whispered it first. If God regrets, does that make him less perfect? The words fell like stones through a stained glass sky. Cassariel recoiled, wings shivered, eyes dimmed. He didn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because something moved above them. A flicker, a watchful pressure, not rage, anticipation. Because even God listens when angels ask what they were never made to wonder. Instead of answering, Cassariel sang a notione so low, it could not be heard in any world where time exists. A warning, but it was too late. The thought had been released, and across the heavens, a tremor passed between mains. It did not destroy, it unified, because others had thought it too. Uriah, Safkiel, even the seraph that guards the river of fire, they had all held the same question beneath their halos. What if we are protecting something that no longer believes in itself? That night, a ripple ran through the cosmos. Light dimmed in 3 galaxies. A comet reversed direction, and deep beneath the Vatican, a relic glowed for the first time in 7 centuries. It bore a single engraving. When angels begin to ask, prophecy returns, because truth is not born in revelation. It is born in doubt. And now the Angel's very guardians of faith had taken their first step toward heresy. Episode 12: The voice that wasn't God's, but spoke from his throne. It began with stillness, not the kind that calms, the kind that warns. The throne unseen by mortal eyes, untouched by time, unshaken since the birth of light Saturday at the center of all that was sacred. And for the first time in eternity, it echoed, not with hymns, not with praise, but with a question spoken back to the angels who had dared to ask it. Who sits upon me when I doubt myself? The words didn't thunder, they whispered, yet the sound cracked every halo in heaven. The cherubim turned away, the seraphim dropped their swords, and the archangels wept not from fear, but from recognition. Because that voice was not God's. It spoke with his shape, his rhythm, but not his certainty. It was something else. The echo of a truth he buried before creation. That voice continued. He asked if I could change my mind, and I have tried, but I cannot undo what I did to silence him. And then, the veil between realms tore. Not in wrath, in confession, beneath the throne, a figure began to rise, not clothed in fire, not clothed in glory, but in dust. Dust that remembered what it was like to speak and be punished for it. The prophet, alive and in flesh, but in word. He did not speak at first. He simply looked at the angels, and they bowed, even Samael, especially Samael. The prophet stepped forward to judge, but to remind. He placed his hand upon the throne, and the light that once blinded all creation dimmed. Then finally, he spoke only once. You silenced me because you feared the question, but I was never meant to be your enemy. I was meant to be his reflection. And the voice from the throne voice that was not quite God answered, then let the world be rewritten. From a question, not a command. In that moment, all the scriptures began to tremble, not with fire, not with judgment, with possibility, because heaven had heard the prophet, and the throne had whispered back, not to reign, but to learn.